Good morning. So at the moment, because obviously the dad of two very young children, don't have a lot of time to put sort of tips out for managers. So Safi's fast asleep. So at the moment, we're just producing a sort of whole string of videos while I'm out on the baby walk. So today, what I wanted to talk about is just the importance of upwards management. So this is something that Danny and I talk to managers about a lot. There's often the assumption that if you're managing a team, then the majority of your efforts need to be put into looking after your team, and that's very good. That's a very noble thing. But really, an integral part of this is actually managing upwards. So if you can actually manage your manager really well, then what that does is that sort of really clarifies expectations for your team. It can help secure resources. It can reduce some of the overwhelm and uncertainty too. So Danny and I just wrote an article, and in it are sort of 7 practical steps that we can take. So there's a lot more detail in there, and we'll put a link in the comments to it. But I just wanted to sort of take you through those 7 steps now briefly. So number 1 is just the importance of sharing the bad news and the good news. So your manager doesn't necessarily need to know everything that goes wrong, because there's just so much stuff and that's your responsibility. But if there's something significant that's happened, or is the implication to be significant, it's really important that you tell them at an early stage. So there's 2 reasons. So number 1 is that they can give you some input, and number 2 is that if they get caught in the corridor by another manager, they don't feel exposed, and that can have a really difficult, damaging impact on the trust in your relationship. The other thing is that with good news is that bad news has a tendency to rise up, but not good news. So managers often have a distorted view of what operational reality is. So it's not about being boastful, but it's just about giving a factual account of some of the positive outcomes that happen in either your team or your individual contribution to it as well. So it just means they have a more balanced view. And managers do like to hear good news. It makes them feel proud of their team. The second thing is tell them how you like to be managed. So that does require you being a little bit vulnerable, but in any modern progressive organisation that should be absolutely fine. So it's just sort of saying, what your communication preferences are, how you like to receive feedback, how you when you genuinely want one-to-ones, and what you like to cover. And it's really sort of taking control of the relationship. It's really important. Sometimes it's like, I don't want to do it because it makes me feel a little bit vulnerable, but it does add a lot of efficiency to the relationship. The third one is to understand their communication preferences and style. So, how do they like to receive reports and updates? So operational managers have lots of detail, and they often communicate in lots of detail. Senior managers often don't want that. They just want bottom line or sort of highlights. So it's really understanding how they like to have reports, what their preferences are. Observe them in meetings and see how they interact, see what irritates them and what makes them happy, and really be behaviourally flexible is what we'd always say. The fourth one is to sort of just demonstrate a positive can-do attitude. So it is difficult when you're overwhelmed and stressed to sort of maintain that happy outlook. So it's not about that, but it's just making sure you do the basics right. So it's following through on your actions, it's being proactive, it's offering to support them in achieving their priorities as well. It's being on time. It's actually sort of paying attention and making sure that there's no unnecessary problems coming out of your team, and that you're not avoiding any big issues that might sort of surface and expand into a bigger problem for everyone. The next one is sort of bringing solutions to difficult problems. This really irritates lots of managers when someone just comes and they just moan and say, "Oh, this is the problem." They really want to see that you've developed a couple of options, and even if you don't know the answer, that's absolutely fine, that you've just got a couple of options and you've reflected on what they are, and you've assessed the trade-offs and the pros and the cons as well, and then that's your personal recommendation. So that also helps develop your practical judgment. It helps them understand your workings, and it also allows them to share their perspective, because often it's really difficult to understand a manager's know-how. So how do they actually do a task, and they can therefore start to share the way in which they would do it. The next one is to really sort of manage expectations. So this comes from Dr. Peter Fuda, a really good Australian consultant. He basically describes that expectations are a third. So a third of expectations are explicit and known. So you would know what my expectations are of you. A third are kind of basically untold. So either you should know what my expectations are of you because you're a manager, I don't need to tell you, or actually it's just something that's actually untellable. So I can't actually share that opinion of you, or something that's happened in the past. And then a third of expectations are actually unconscious. So they haven't actually articulated it. So they may not have an opinion on something or a project that they're giving you or a task to do until they actually see what you've produced. So this can create massive inefficiency. So it's really your task is to, uncover those expectations and to get them out in the open. So you can ask questions like, what are your expectations of me in the next 90 days, 1 year, or 3 years? What will it look like when it's working? And what are your success measures that you'll assess me against? And they may not have an answer, but what you're encouraging them to do is be more strategic, thinking about your area. They've got a lot of responsibility, so they may just not have thought it through. So a really good set of questions like that, and a space to do it, can really sort of make your relationship work really well. And then the last one is basically understanding and supporting the achievement of their priorities. So many managers don't know what their managers' responsibilities or priorities are. Take the time to really understand them and help them achieve them, because if they can secure their priorities, then it's likely that your whole area will get more resources and more a better reputation. So if you can actually understand them, and you actually understand the priorities in just the course of your daily work, if you're dealing with stakeholders that might be to help them deliver their priorities, engage them in that as well. And also it just shows that you can take some of their responsibility off them and give you exposure to sort of new and interesting tasks as well. So it sounds like a lot, and it is a bit of effort to get started, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and the more natural it becomes as well, and the more trusting your relationship comes, and the less friction there is as well.